In his shortest visit abroad, Pope Francis arrived in France earlier today to address the European Parliament. In his speech to the MEPs, he reiterated that the Union had aged and grown tired, as well as condemning Europe for its treatment of immigrants and the neglect of young unemployed. Details in the following story.
It all happened in a flash. Pope Francis has now returned to Italy after making a whistle-stop trip to Strasbourg, France today, visiting the European Parliament and the Council of Europe. And in this brief visit, Francis on one hand brought a message of hope to Europeans and on the other a complaint to its politicians. After meeting with European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker and European Council President Herman Van Rompuy, Francis addressed the Parliament and its representatives. And despite the lengthy standing ovation at the start and finish of his speech, he warned of an increasing mistrust people felt for the Union's institutions, as they are burdened by economic crisis and spiritually adrift in a culture that he believes no longer values the dignity of human beings.
Despite a larger and stronger union, Europe seems to give the impression of being somewhat elderly, feeling less and less a protagonist in a world which frequently regards it with mistrust and even at times suspicion. In addressing you today, I would like, as a pastor, to offer a message of hope and encouragement to all the citizens of Europe.
It was not the first time Francis described Europe a tired continent that needed reinvigorating, but he warned further of surging nationalism, anti-immigration sentiments and rising unemployment. So for this, he urged legislators to promote policies that create jobs and accept immigrants, and that the only way to confront immigration-related conflict was by enacting adequate legislation to protect the rights of European citizens as well as the rights of immigrants. The plight of migrants seeking a better life in Europe is close to his heart, especially after his visit to the island of Lampedusa last summer. Pope Francis called for action following the deaths of thousands of migrants by drowning.
There needs to be a united response to the question of migration. We cannot allow the Mediterranean to become a vast cemetery. The boats landing daily on the shores of Europe are filled with men and women who need acceptance and assistance. The absence of mutual support within the European Union runs the risk of encouraging particularistic solutions to the problem, solutions which fail to take into account the human dignity of immigrants and thus contribute to slave labour and continuing social tensions.
Francis announced he is planning a second visit to France next year, and by then he will hope that his suggestions for policy changes would have been accepted.
Joining us over the phone is Reverend Frank GELLI. Thank you for joining us. Now, in his speech, Pope Francis describes Europe as a weak nation. This must have been quite a shock for the European Union, don't you think?
Pope Francis has pressed many of the right buttons, and I'm sure he has been listened to. He has made the poor the main emphasis of his ministry, and that is completely in line with Christianity, because caring for the poor is one of the noblest aspirations of the human spirit. So I'm not surprised he has spoken in favor of immigrants and so on. He could do nothing less. I wonder if he has touched the wrong button when he has mentioned, he has compared, I read online, to Europe now to a grandmother, no longer fertile and vibrant. You know, he would have offended, if he said that, he would have offended millions of grandmothers in Europe. And we all know how important the grandmother is to us, and how, indeed, how vigorous and how vibrant grandmoms can be. So I would advise him to be a bit careful of the kind of comparison. And he himself is an example of an old man who's actually extremely active, extremely vigorous. So we are dealing here with a very maverick personality, quite an exciting personality, but also someone who can be a bit of a loose cannon.
Well, let's look at St. John Paul II. When he travelled to Strasbourg a quarter of a century ago, he described Europe as a beacon of civilization. Has Europe changed that drastically? According to Pope Francis, it has.
Well, certainly, as centuries of European history are rooted in Christianity, it's impossible for a leader of Christendom not to regard Europe with a special affection, so to speak. I think the Pope was addressing himself not so much to the Europe of Europeans, but the Europe of Strasbourg, the Europe of the European Union, which is a very different kind of beast. John Paul II, whom you mentioned, was very saddened by the EU refusing to make any reference to God in its preamble to its fundamental charter. No reference at all to God. That was shocking, it was shameful. So, and the European Union today is, I mean, I'm a cultural European, but I have no trust whatsoever in the European Union because, as many, certainly in Britain, would agree, it has become unrepresentative, it's bureaucratic, it's undemocratic. So in that sense, there is a difference between Europe and the European Union.
Reverend Frank GELLI, political commentator, thank you very much for joining us.